Video games have been a big part of my life since I was a little kid. When my mom bought the original Nintendo for me and my brother back in the early 90s, I was blown away. Never before had I seen something like this, and it was something I was going to cherish well into adulthood. I was hooked on it. I was playing video games more than I was doing my own schoolwork. Now, of course, back then it wasn't serious schoolwork, but I simply couldn't get off the games. I played all day. Fast forward a few years in time, and Nintendo Power started advertising the Nintendo 64. At first, I was thinking to myself, wait, this is the Nintendo 64? What the hell happened to the other 63 of them? It made no sense to me at the time. Of course, this is referring to the fact that the Nintendo 64 was 64 bits. I had seen some early screenshots of Super Mario 64 in the pages of Nintendo Power, and I stared at those images for hours. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and almost every night I would dream of playing the N64. I had seen the images of these games in multiple magazines and advertisements, and the wait was agony. The Nintendo 64 was released on September 29, 1996 in North America, but I couldn't afford it. My mom told me to ask for it for Christmas. The thought of waiting an additional 4 months was devastating to me, but at the time, I didn't have any other choice. The weeks leading to Christmas went so slow I thought Christmas would never come. I remember I visited one of my cousins on Christmas. Underneath that Christmas tree, I saw a big box, and I just knew that that box was the Nintendo 64, but we weren't opening presents yet. A few hours later, I opened the present, and there it was. The sexy beast known as the Nintendo 64 was staring right at me, ready to be played. My cousin had already had the N64 and was playing it that night. He had gotten Super Mario 64 as well and was playing it right in front of me, but he wouldn't let me play, little bastard. Watching him play the game was both amazing and torture at the same time. I just watched the camera circle around the castle in an opening cutscene and was blown the fuck away. I couldn't believe it. I was so used to seeing Mario in a 2D simplistic world, and now seeing him in a totally 3D world, totally and unbelievably awesome. And the graphics were so much better than what I had seen in the pages of Nintendo Power. When I finally got the chance to actually play the game, it was more than anything I could have ever imagined. Way more. At the time, I only had Super Mario 64 to play, but that was more than enough to keep me playing the ever-living fuck out of my brand new Nintendo 64. The graphics were unreal. The sound was top-notch, and the controls? Perfect. Everything about the console had exceeded my expectations. It took me forever to actually beat the game, but that actually enhanced my experience playing the game, while normally that might have pissed me off. After I had completed the game, Star Fox 64 was the next game on my radar. I looked everywhere for that game and it was always sold out. One day, I went to Toys R Us and had given them my phone number with the hopes that they would call me when they received another shipment of the game. It was my last chance. They eventually did call and said they had one copy left. As soon as I heard that, I practically went through the roof of my house in my race to that building. I bought the game and played the shit out of it. Once again, I was blown away by the sheer awesomeness of what I was playing. Everything, again, was just perfect. We would randomly go to Toys R Us to see what other games the N64 had to offer, and it seemed like every time we went there, the shelves would be packed with more games. That's what it was like back then. Games just seemed to come out every week, and each one of them were awesome. I remember buying the game Banjo-Kazooie just for the fuck of it, and while the game wasn't great, it still had its own charm as part of my N64 collection. While most of the games were good, there were also games that pissed me off. Mission Impossible. Just saying those two words is enough to raise my blood pressure. I spent hours on that fucking game, and it didn't get any easier with each time I played it. That embassy level, let me tell you, unforgiving. I had such a hard time with that fucking level, but it pissed me off to the point where I didn't want to give up. Oh no, I was going to persevere no matter what it took and no matter how long it took. I guess you could say I sucked at the game. And yes, I did. I sucked balls at that game. There were some levels that took me days to beat, but in the end, it was still fun. How about Winback? I remember hating that game so fucking much because of how difficult it was. I couldn't stand when I died, because when you died the same way every single time. And watching him fall down to his knees and on his face and watching the camera circle around his lifeless body, let me tell you, that pissed me off like nobody's business. This game is the only game I can remember off the top of my head genuinely not really liking all that much. It wasn't really bad, but it just wasn't doing it for me. It was too difficult and the controls were a bit tricky. I could really go on and on all day and night with this, but onto my point with this video. Now, of course, all this was back in the 80s and 90s. That's 20 years ago, basically. Now, fast forward to the current day. I know I play mainly NES games on this channel, but I do play current games, but it's only a handful. Games nowadays just aren't as exciting. Back then, I played so many fucking games that I have a whole collection of Nintendo and N64 games, even PlayStation games. Now, not so much. I've been wondering this for at least the past 5 years. Just what the hell happened? Why are video games nowhere near as exciting as they were 20 years ago? I have a few theories as to why this may be. One, we were younger. Now, of course, I can't speak for everybody, and I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me, and if you do, that's fine. But I just wanted to discuss this a bit because I'm sure there are other gamers out there who do agree with me. At the time, we were young. I was around 10 years old when the N64 first came out, and so therefore I couldn't have been possibly expecting a hell of a lot. I didn't know what I know now about video games. My second theory is that we were a lot easier to please. Since we were kids, we really weren't hardcore gamers yet. There wasn't online gameplay back then either, so there really wasn't a competitive drive in us. Reviews for games back then were good too. I'd say 90% of video games back then were receiving scores of 9s and 10s, whereas nowadays, that's really not the case. It's becoming exceedingly difficult for video games nowadays to generate good feedback from most gaming magazines and reviewers because now, we're older and we're expecting a lot more. We're just more and more difficult to please, and a perfect score in this day and age is nearly non-existent. The PS2 had its fair share of good video games. I have a whole collection of games for that. The PS3 though, not so much. You could take one look at my collections for the NES, the N64, the GameCube, the PlayStation 2, and finally the PlayStation 3, and you can notice a trend. With each console, the collection is getting smaller and smaller. And my reason for that is because video games just aren't as enjoyable now. The replay value is low for me. Once you beat a game, if you even do end up beating it, there's not much else to do except maybe sell it on eBay. Back in the Nintendo days, the replay value was through the roof. To this day, I pop in games like Super Mario 64, Star Fox 64, the N64 Mario Party games, and I still enjoy them today as much as I did back then. Now, take some PS2 games that I haven't played in a while, and while the enjoyment is still there, it's not quite as much as the first playthrough. Again, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I do think there are other gamers out there who share the same opinion as me. I just beg the question, what has happened in the last 15 to 20 years? Why are games just nowhere near as exciting and enjoyable now as they were back then? I'd love to hear some opinions on this matter. Well, this video turned out to be way longer than I thought it would be. I know this video was kind of pointless, but I just wanted to get this off my chest, and I doubt I'm the only one who feels this way. Voice your opinions on this matter down below. Thanks for watching.